The Soldiers of Ares. Chapter 31. Around 100 years ago, the Great Trojan War took place between two huge armies, the Greek Empire and the Kingdom of Troy. The Greek Empire was actually a large alliance formed by various different kingdoms, and all the kings led by the king of Argos called Agamemnon. The large continent where the kingdoms resided was called Greece, and hence the alliance was named the Greek Alliance. Troy, on the other hand, was a large and powerful kingdom to the west of the Greek continent, and was led by King Priam, and the people of Troy were called Trojans. Now the spark for the war began when Paris, Priam's son, paid a visit to Menelaus, the king of Sparta. Menelaus was married to Helen, a girl who was said to rival the goddess Aphrodite herself in beauty. Paris fell in love immediately with Helen the moment he laid eyes on her, but he couldn't do anything as she was married to Menelaus. During Paris's visit to Sparta, Menelaus got news that his uncle had died, and he went immediately to attend his funeral, leaving his wife Helen to be host to the Prince of Troy. Paris, on the other hand, decided to use this situation to his advantage, and with the help of goddess Aphrodite, who he was favored by, seduced Helen, and even convinced her to run away to Troy with him. They left before Menelaus returned. When Menelaus finally came back, he was shocked at the betrayal of Paris. To betray one's host was the highest order of disrespect in Greece, and Menelaus, consumed by rage, went to his brother for help. His brother was none other than Agamemnon, the leader of the Greek alliance. On hearing his brother's story, he summoned the other kings of Greece for their assistance. Soon a huge army was formed, and over 1,200 Greek warships set sail for Troy to defend the honor of the Spartan king and make Troy pay for this betrayal. Once the Greek soldiers reached Troy, Agamemnon met with King Priam and demanded that Helen be returned. He also demanded that Paris must also be given to the Greeks as a prisoner, so that he may be punished for his actions. Priam refused to do so, and Agamemnon declared that the entire city of Troy was to pay for this decision. Agamemnon knew that Priam would not accept these conditions and was pleased to go to war against Troy. The reason for this was Troy was said to be impenetrable. A wall surrounded the city called the Trojan Wall, which was over 50 feet tall and indestructible to all forms of attack. This wall had made the city impenetrable for hundreds of years, and whoever managed to seize Troy would become a legend. Agamemnon wanted to be that legend, and he was willing to start a war and sacrifice countless lives to do so. And so the Great War began, and both sides were too evenly matched in strength. The Olympian gods could no longer stand by and watch as the war unfolded, and they began to choose sides. But Emperor Zeus would not let the war consume the entire world, and he ordered the Olympians not to directly get involved in the war, but they were allowed to support either side in any other way they pleased. It was also decided that God King Zeus himself would favor neither side in the war, and would instead act as judge. And so the gods began to choose sides. On the Trojan side were Aphrodite, the goddess of love, the sibling gods Apollo of the light, and Artemis of the hunt, and the war god Ares. Ares had first favored the Greeks, but the beautiful Aphrodite convinced him to quickly change sides. The Greeks, on the other hand, were favored by Athena, the goddess of wisdom, the smith god Hephaestus, Hera, wife of Zeus and the queen of the gods, and also Admiral Poseidon, the god of the sea. The other gods chose to stay neutral, although Hermes acted as the official messenger to both sides and as a personal ambassador of Lord Zeus. But even with the gods involved, the two sides were still too evenly matched, and the war went on for 10 long years. During this time, many powerful warriors emerged who became heroes to their respective sides, the most famous of these being Achilles of the Greeks and Hector of Troy. These two were the strongest warriors on either side, and their skills were evenly matched. But on the 10th year of the war, something unexpected happened. Achilles had a quarrel with Agamemnon and refused to go into battle for the Greeks. This greatly shifted the tides of the war in the favor of Troy, as Hector began to slaughter the Greek forces unopposed. "Wait, hold on a second," Mia said. Maximus looked at her and asked, "What's wrong?" "Well, why did Achilles have a quarrel with Agamemnon in the first place?" she asked. "It's Agamemnon," Maximus corrected her. "And I don't know, maybe he didn't like his new haircut or something. You could ask him yourself when he wakes." He could tell by Mia's face that it was not a conversation that would ever happen. "Perhaps I can shed some light on that subject," Daedalus said. He had startled them a bit, but Maximus realized that it was time for him to get up again. Daedalus smiled and said, "I was awake for a while now, but I just did not want to interrupt the story. So you know why Achilles fought with Agame, the Greek leader guy?" Mia asked. Daedalus checked to see if Achilles was still asleep. Once he confirmed this, he said, "I don't know if Achilles is comfortable talking about this." But the reason he and Agamemnon had a disagreement was because of a girl. He looked around at all their confused expressions and said, "Let me explain. When the Greeks seized one of Troy's temples, the people there were taken as prisoners, and among them was a very beautiful girl named Briseis. It was Achilles who had led the capture of the temple, and he had met Briseis there. She had stood up to him when he threatened to kill her, and he was so amazed by this that he fell for her immediately. But when the prisoners were taken back to the Greek camp, Agamemnon too was enticed by Briseis' beauty and wanted her for himself. This, of course, Achilles opposed, but Agamemnon still kept her as his prisoner. Achilles was enraged by this, and he declared that neither he nor his men would fight for Agamemnon any longer. So what happened next? Mia asked, barely containing her excitement. Well, once Agamemnon saw how pathetically they were doing without Achilles, he immediately sent Briseis back to him along with many other gifts. But Achilles was stubborn and still refused to join the battle again, Daedalus said. Then what finally changed his mind? Mia asked. Well, I think it would be best if Max told you the rest. My time is almost up, Daedalus said. Wait, one more question. Where is Briseis now? Mia asked. Daedalus looked down with sadness and said, I'm afraid like many others she did not survive the war. Silence followed these words. Maximus remembered what Ajax had said about Achilles losing nearly everyone close to him, and he kind of understood now why the great warrior kept the fact that he was alive a secret and wandered the world alone. After a few moments, Daedalus said, It seems I am off again, but Max, please do keep the story going, would you? Maximus nodded to him, and with that Daedalus went blank again. Maximus helped the old inventor to his bed again and turned to Mia and said, Now where were we? Achilles was out of the battle and the Trojans were gaining control of the war, but Patroclus, who was like a brother to Achilles, and his best friend tried to reason with him to rejoin the war. But Achilles in his stubbornness refused. That's when Patroclus decided to take matters into his own hands. He stole his best friend's armor and led his men into battle, pretending to be Achilles. The plan was going well, with the Trojans thinking Achilles had returned, lost their morale to fight, and began to flee. That was until Hector came into the battle. Hector challenged Patroclus to a duel, thinking that he was Achilles. But even with the great warrior's armor, Patroclus was still no match for Hector, and he fell on the battlefield. Only after ripping through the armor and killing his foe did Hector realize what he had done, news of his friend's murder and how it came to be reached Achilles, and he went into an uncontrollable rage. It was also at this time Achilles' mother requested armor for her son to the smith god Hephaestus, to replace the one broken by Hector. Thus, the armor of Styx was forged and given to Achilles. Legend also says he was given a powerful shield as well. With his new armor and shield and unimaginable rage, he went ahead to slaughter hundreds of Trojans. He then went forth to the gates of Troy and challenged Hector to one-on-one combat to the death, which Hector had no choice but to accept. The war itself was stopped for the next day as everyone gathered at the gates of Troy to witness the two mighty warriors fight. When Achilles came, he refused to wear his helmet so that Hector could be sure that he would be facing the real Achilles this time. What followed was said to be one of the greatest battles in history. Hector was a great swordsman, and he fought well, but armed with his indestructible armor and with anger boiling within him. Achilles was unstoppable. The fight went on for hours, but in the end, Hector fell and Achilles emerged victorious. When Achilles stood over Hector's lifeless body, the only wound that could be seen on him was a scar above his right eye, a scar that he still had. But Achilles was not done with Hector, even in death. His anger still blazed within him and his revenge was not complete. He tied Hector's corpse to the back of a chariot and dragged it across the battlefield to further desecrate the once great warrior. Hector's father Priam and his brother Paris watched helpless along with the rest of Troy as the body of their fallen hero was humiliated. Achilles even refused to return Hector's body to Troy so that he may not even be given a proper funeral. With Hector gone and Achilles back in full force, the morale of the Trojans fell greatly, and it was not long before the Greeks took over the entire battlefield. The Trojans retreated and hid behind their walls, only counterattacking from within. The Greeks were faced with a new problem now. Though the battlefield was theirs, they still had no method of getting past the Trojan wall. Luckily, they had a brilliant strategist on their side. He was one of the greatest Greek heroes and said to be the greatest tactician to fight in the war, and his name was Odysseus. Now, it was Odysseus who came up with a plan to take down the Trojan wall from the inside. After a week of relentless attacks on the wall, the Greeks decided to pack up and leave. So when the Trojans went to check the next day, they found all the Greeks and their ships gone. But on the seashore, the Greeks had left a huge wooden horse encrusted with gold, diamonds and other precious gems as an offering to Admiral Poseidon for his support in the war, as horses were Poseidon's sacred animal. The Trojans, on the other hand, decided to claim the horse for themselves as the spoils of war. They quickly moved the wooden horse within the gates before Poseidon's men came to claim it. All this was happening according to Odysseus's plans. He knew the Trojans would claim the horse for themselves, so he built it in such a way that few warriors could fit within it. Legend says that the horse could only fit 7 warriors, and so the Greeks had to send their strongest 7 into Troy. They say this is how the Omega-7 came to be formed. Once inside, the 7 warriors waited till night to exit the horse. They then went ahead to take out the remaining guards and open the gates of Troy. The rest of the Greek army had not left either. They merely circled back at night and waited for the Omega-7 to open the gates. Once the gates were open, the Greeks stormed into Troy, led by Agamemnon, and laid siege to the entire city in one night. When morning came, the Greeks had finally won the 10-year-long war. Maximus got up to drink some water. His throat was parched from telling the story. "Wow, that's quite the tale, huh?" Mia said. "So I get that Troy was destroyed in the war, but how come the Greek Empire isn't around anymore either?" Well, the war greatly weakened the Greek Empire as well, and soon civil war broke out among them. To end all the madness and prevent further wars, Zeus himself interfered and added the entire Greek continent to his own kingdom. Rex said, "There are still a lot of smaller kingdoms around the world though, but none are as large as the old Greek continent, or nearly as powerful to challenge the empires of the Olympian gods." Mia nodded to show that she understood, but then she asked, "Wait, but the entire war happened because Paris and Helen were in love and the Greeks fought against that. Doesn't that sort of make them the bad guys?" Maximus did not know what to say to this, but luckily he didn't have to say anything. Someday you will realize there are things worth fighting for greater than love. They all turned to see that Achilles had awoken. He got off his bed and sat in the front seat next to Rex. "What could be more important than love?" Mia asked. Achilles did not turn to look at her. He continued to coldly stare out the window and said, "Loyalty." The Soldiers of Ares. Chapter 32. They kept on driving across the pastures. They stopped by a small town on their way. It was strange, since even though the town was small, the technology there could have rivaled Mars's capital Thrace. It was strange to see even tiny huts sprouting multiple antennas, and he even spotted a few schoolchildren carrying portable computers. Maximus had heard of these before. They were called laptops or something, but he had never actually seen one anywhere in the trenches. They did not have much time to explore, as Achilles wanted to reach Athens as fast as possible without wasting time. They did not stop anywhere at night as well. Because of this, it was decided that one of them would keep driving through the night while the others slept. Since Maximus was well rested and tired of doing nothing all day, he volunteered to do so. It was past midnight now, and Maximus had been at the wheel for almost 4 hours. He realized now that he was not as well rested as he had thought. His eyes were barely open, and his foot was aching from managing the pedal all night. All he wanted to do was to park the truck and get some sleep. But he had taken up the responsibility himself, so he was not about to stop driving just because he felt a bit tired. As he drove, his thoughts began to wander back home to the trenches. He was a long way from there now, and he had no idea when he would be able to see it again. But he was sure about one thing: he would go back. After all, Kayla would be waiting for him there. He was sure of it. He still regretted not asking her out while he was there, but hey, it didn't end that bad. After all, he had got a kiss at the end. He just wished he knew when he would be able to see her again. Almost an hour passed when someone said, "Wow, you're still up and driving." Mia had gotten up. She came up careful not to step on Rex, who was sleeping on the floor, and moved to the front to sit next to Maximus. "Well, you're up way too early," he said. Mia shifted her eyes and said, "Yeah, well, I had a bad dream, and I never could go back to sleep after one of those." Maximus noticed that she was clutching her left arm, the part where her mark was, and he knew better than to ask what the dream was. "Wish I could go to bed, though. I don't think I'll have any trouble falling asleep," he said. "Then why don't you?" "I could take over for a while," Mia suggested. "What, you?" he said. Mia frowned at this. "And why are you so surprised? Is it because I'm a girl?" "No, but it is because you're kind of young." "How old are you anyway?" he said. "I'm not that young, you know. I'm nearly your age. Almost 15 and a half, I think," she said. "You think?" he asked. Mia hesitated a bit before saying anything. "Yeah, well, I was stuck in a place where I didn't exactly celebrate any birthdays, all right, and I'm not sure on how long I was kept there. So yeah, my timeline is a bit hazy." Maximus didn't know what to say to this, but it was clear from her tone that she didn't stay at that place by choice. They remained silent for a while. Then he said, "So you want to drive or what?" They stopped to the side to switch seats. Maximus didn't go to sleep just yet. He wanted to make sure that Mia actually knew how to drive. She started up the truck without much trouble, and she wasn't kidding about knowing how to drive either. All this just made Maximus realize that the girl sitting next to him was shrouded in mystery. The worst part was she had made it clear that her past was an off-limit topic. But he couldn't just let all this go. He had to ask something. So, why do you want to go to Athens so badly anyway? You at least owe me that. Actually, I don't owe you anything, she said. Maximus decided to drop the subject. Fine, he thought to himself. If she didn't want to share, it was okay. It was her life, after all. He was just about to get up and go to sleep when she said, if you really want to know, part of the reason I want to get into Athens is because of Aegis. Maximus sat down again, the energy shield thing which Daedalus told us about. Why you expect an airstrike on your head? Haha, very funny. Aegis is not just a shield against physical attacks, you know. It also blocks unauthorized communication channels and traces even magical ones, she said. So what, someone's trying to trace you? He asked. She hesitated to speak again, like just talking about it was bad luck. Look, I got some people after me, all right. Some bad people. And Athens is kind of like the safest place I can be from them, she said. Maximus nodded to this. It wasn't the whole story, but it was something. He decided to take Achilles' advice and leave it. Maybe someday she would tell him herself. But he just had one more question. You said that Aegis was one of the reasons you wanted to reach Athens. What's the other? Well, there is supposed to be someone there who is on real bad terms with the people chasing me. I was hoping that maybe he could help me, she said. He thought for a second and said, kind of like an enemy's enemy is your friend. She nodded. Yeah, something like that. Achilles says he knows the man personally and that he would introduce me. Now, can we please drop the topic? And weren't you about to fall asleep a few seconds ago? Maximus knew that asking her anything more would be useless. All right, if you can handle it, then I'm off to bed, he said. She nodded, and Maximus went to the bed below Hedger's, and he fell asleep almost immediately. Maximus woke up late again the next day. He was a bit disappointed that the voice hadn't paid him a visit yet. He woke up to see Achilles back on the wheel and the rest of them sitting around the truck. It was nice to see that no one was sleeping for a change. The day went past uneventfully, and Maximus wasn't complaining. Because an eventful day probably meant confronting a barbarian king who rode around with man-eating horses. Not to mention the troops under Captain Sharp's command. But it was easy to see that everyone was tired of being cooped up in the truck all day. The only time they stopped was to refuel at gas stations. These were also the only places they had to freshen up, and the toilets there were worse than an underground sewer. But they had no choice but to keep moving to Athens. The sad part was, they were only halfway there. But when Daedalus awoke in the evening, he said, "Might I suggest that we spend the night at a motel tonight? It seems our entire traveling party feels a bit car-sick at the moment." I second that idea. The bed is nice and all, but I'm used to hanging by my tail to sleep, you know, and there's nothing to dangle from in here, Hedger said. In that case, you can take the floor next time, Rex said. Maximus felt it was a good idea as well, but they all looked to Achilles for approval. He had sort of become the unofficial leader of the pack. We shouldn't waste any more time than we have to. The sooner we reach Athens, the better, he said. Come now, Achilles, Athens is not going anywhere, and you should know how important it is to stretch your legs once in a while. Daedalus said. I think you mean leg, Hedger said, and Mia elbowed him in the stomach to shut up. It took a while to convince him, but Achilles finally agreed to stop for the night at a motel. That's the spirit, Hedger said. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? And Maximus kind of felt like he jinxed it by saying that. They stopped that night at a place called Highway Palace. It was a beaten-up old place with broken windows and faded paint. The neon sign outside had half its letters missing. Well, this looks luxurious, Mia said. Would you rather take a bath in the gas station? Rex asked, and that shut her up. They rented 2 rooms from an old satyr at the reception desk with a hearing aid. Achilles, Maximus, and Rex took one while the other 3 got the room right next to them. The place was nothing great, but it felt good to be on solid ground after moving all day. They had dinner at a small 24-hour diner nearby. The food wasn't great, and Maximus was really starting to miss the banquets at Vulcan City. But they talked and laughed as they ate their dinners. Everyone was in a good mood at being finally out of the truck, but they would have to be moving again in the morning, and Athens was still a couple of days away. They all went back to their rooms after that. Achilles opened the door using the key he got from the reception. They went inside to turn on the lights to their empty room. Only when the lights came on, they realized that the room was not empty at all. A man in a golden brown suit was sitting in the chair in the corner. Maximus recognized the man's smirking face immediately. Hermes was paying them a visit again. The Soldiers of Ares. Chapter 33. Both Achilles and Maximus drew their swords. Rex had changed his new arm into gun mode, and the barrel was pointed right at Hermes' head, but the messenger god still just sat in his seat unaffected by all this. Not even his smirk had left his face. I'm sensing so much hostility in the air. I wonder why, Hermes said. Achilles stepped forward and said, You know why, so give me one good reason not to cut you right here. Hermes got off his chair. Now he stretched his arms like he just got up from a nap. Well, how about because you couldn't even if you wanted to, he said. In an instant he was behind the three of them. His scepter with the snakes on it had appeared in his hand. Rex and Maximus were still staring at the spot where Hermes had been a second before, but not Achilles. He had turned around swiftly just as Hermes came behind them. They heard a sound of metal clashing as his sword met with the snake-coiled scepter. Not bad, Hermes said. Not a lot of people can say they are fast enough to keep up with my movements. But you should know if I get serious I'm a lot faster. Maximus had no idea what that would be like. He couldn't even see Hermes move as it was. What do you want, Hermes? Achilles asked. His sword was still crossed with the god's scepter. Put away your blade for a while and I'll tell you, he answered. Achilles didn't move for a few seconds. Then he slowly pulled his sword away. But he still did not sheath it. Now was that so hard? Hermes said mockingly. His smirk was now a wide, playful grin. That clash of weapons was so unnecessary. My caduceus is not even a melee weapon, you know. Now let's talk like civilized beings, he said. Maximus figured that caduceus was the name of his scepter. A lot of powerful weapons were given names, and any weapon that a god used had to be powerful. Hermes walked past them back towards the chair. Such a lovely place you guys found. It has a nice abandoned building meets rat infestation theme going on, so retro, he said, looking around at the room. Did you come here just to redo the furniture then? Achilles asked. Hermes smirked at him and said, No, not at all. I'm actually here to make things right between us, so there would be no hard feelings. You put a tracker on us that nearly got us killed, Rex said, and I'm real sorry for that. But you see, it was all part of a business deal. But I felt so bad about it later that I decided to come down here personally to apologize, Hermes said, and it was clear from his face that he wasn't sorry for anything. Achilles raised his sword again and said, Get to the point. To help, of course, Hermes said with a grin, by giving you the most valuable thing I have, information. They were all listening to him now, and Achilles nodded for him to continue. Well, here's what I got. This little motel you guys are standing in is going to be turned into a pile of ash and dust by midnight. Ares' men have this place surrounded with a rather wonderful RAM tank with its guns pointed right at this building. They should blow this place up within an hour, so I suggest that you run, Hermes said. How did they find us? Maximus asked. Hermes looked at him and said, There are plenty of other ways to track someone you know. I just had to wait till you guys stopped moving for a while to get a good read on you. Why tell us this? Achilles asked. Because I want to get on someone's good side. Now I know you know me and Ares are working for someone. I felt a little magical spyware peeking into our last meeting. It was well hidden, but I am the god of communication after all, he said. Maximus remembered the voice telling him that it was not safe to show him visions for a while, and now he knew why. And how would saving us make you look good? Achilles asked. I'm glad you asked, Achilles, Hermes said, mocking the tone of a teacher. You see, if you live, it makes Ares look like an incompetent idiot. And that's when I'll sweep in and provide some very useful information, making me a savior. So, for the moment at least, I'm rooting for you guys. Maximus understood now what Achilles meant when he said that Hermes always had an agenda of his own. Wait, so what information will you provide? Maximus asked. Hermes looked at him with a grin and said, Why, information on the enemy, of course, a very useful bit of gossip that the great hero of the Trojan War, Achilles, is still alive. Hermes moved towards the window and opened it. The window was large enough for him to fit through easily. Well, you guys should really start moving. The clock is ticking, you know. With that, the wings on his shoes came out again. He jumped out the window, and within seconds he disappeared into the air. Well, what now? Rex asked. Wake the others. We're getting out of here as fast as we can, Achilles said, and they ran to the next room to do so. It took a while for Mia to come and open the door, and when they stepped inside, Daedalus was mumbling on his bed, and Hedger was already asleep, hanging upside down with his tail wrapped around a coat hanger on the wall. What's going on? Mia asked as Maximus went ahead to wake Hedger. We have to get out of here now. The soldiers have found us, Rex said. That got everyone's attention. Are they in the building? Hedger asked, now fully awake. Achilles shook his head and said, Not yet, but the ram tank is pointed right at us, and the only reason they haven't shot us yet is because they need Daedalus alive. They grabbed their things and went ahead downstairs where the old satyr was fast asleep. They decided to take the back exit, but it was locked. Hedger could have used his quill key, or Mia could have picked it easily, but Rex decided that the most efficient method would be to kick the door open. The entire door lay broken on the side as all of them rushed outside towards their truck. They got in quickly, and once they started to move, Hedger asked, Okay, where are the soldiers? I don't even see a bunch of dust bunnies here. Like an answer to his question, they heard a huge explosion from behind. They turned to see the motel they had been in seconds before was burning down to its ashes. "I thought you said they needed Daedalus alive," Mia screamed. "They must have seen us pull out. That was probably a warning shot," Rex said. Mia was whimpering now. But there were other people inside. Mia had just sunk into a corner, clutching her knees. Maximus realized that despite everything, she was not a soldier and she must not be used to seeing people die. He remembered how freaked out she was when the dirt picks got taken out. Maximus went up to her and said, "Listen, I know that this is hard, but you have to keep it together. I know you're not used to seeing people die." Mia shook her head and said to him in a whisper, "You don't understand. I have seen too many people die already. I just don't want to see it anymore." Maximus didn't know what to say to this. "Look, just keep your eyes on the prize. You have to reach Athens, remember. That's all that matters, and I promise you we will reach there," he said. Mia straightened up again. "You're right. Athens is all that matters." She then got up and said, "Sorry, lost my head for a moment. But I'm all right now. So what's the plan?" "That's simple. Don't get killed," Hedger said. The Soldiers of Ares. Chapter 34. They were off the highway now, and Achilles was taking them through the grassy pastures as an effort to lose them. But it was no use. 4 jeeps were on their tails spraying them with bullets. The ram tank wasn't in sight just yet, but they were sure it wasn't far behind. "Running isn't helping Achilles," Rex said. Achilles nodded and asked Maximus to take the wheel. He went ahead to charge up his sword again. It had begun to glow a bright blue when suddenly the truck began to lose control. "I think they hit one of the back tires," Maximus shouted. Achilles closed his eyes to think. When he opened them, he said, "Max, stop the truck. You, me, and Rex are going to get out and hold them back. Mia, you know to drive right. You and Hedger keep the truck moving as far away from us as possible. Whatever happens, we cannot let Daedalus fall into their hands again." On these orders, Maximus stopped the truck, and the 3 of them jumped out. Mia took over the wheel and started to drive away. But with a fully flattened wheel, they weren't driving so well. When the 3 of them got out, they were faced with 4 army jeeps, mounted with machine guns on their hoods aimed at them. Maximus thought he was going to die right there, but as always, Achilles had a plan. His blade had been blue for a while now, and with one huge slash, it sent a wave of blue energy hurtling towards the vehicles. The energy had formed an arc that was wide enough to hit all 4 of the jeeps, and all their mounted weapons stopped firing instantly as all of them stopped moving. The blue arc had acted like an electromagnetic pulse of some sort, but they weren't out of the fire just yet. The soldiers began pouring out of the vehicles, and soon they were surrounded by around 20 of them, including Captain Sharp. The soldiers were from an assortment of races such as humans, satyrs, centaurs, and even a couple of minotaurs, and all of them had their weapons raised. "Get them!" Captain Sharp yelled. More than half of them charged, and a few with guns stayed back to attack from a distance. But they weren't the only ones with guns this time. Rex raised his arm and aimed the barrel straight at the gunners and started to fire away. And one thing was for sure, Rex definitely had the better gun. It fired yellow balls of energy that gave off mini explosions on contact, and soon the gunners were running for cover. With bullets out of the way, Maximus and Achilles were left to handle the rest of the soldiers. They began the fight, the 2 of them against around 15 of Mars's finest. Achilles was easily keeping up with them as usual, and to Max's surprise, so was he. It looked like all the training had really paid off, and he was able to handle 3 soldiers at once. Achilles wasn't fooling around this time either. Around him, 5 soldiers were already down and out. Captain Sharp had pulled out her yellow energy-tipped spear again, and she too started to face off against Achilles. But he still held his own, without much trouble now, although that's when they heard a rumble behind them as the RAM tank had finally caught up. The lights from the RAM tank lit up the night as it drove towards them, its dual barrels aimed and ready to fire. Maximus was still too busy with the soldiers on him to even think about this now. Suddenly, Achilles broke away from the attackers and came to his side. "I'll take care of the soldiers. You get to Rex and make sure that the tank does not get past us." Maximus nodded and made a run for it towards Rex. A few of the soldiers tried chasing after him but were stopped by Achilles. Achilles, on the other hand, had around 10 attackers, along with Captain Sharp on him now, and somehow he was still untouched. Maximus was a different story. Even though the lack of armor had made him a bit more agile, he had nothing to defend himself with now. He was used to taking heavy hits on his arm guard, and now that he had lost it, he had to drastically change his fighting style, the result of which were multiple cuts and bruises all over his body. He reached Rex, who was still firing away at anyone who even tried to take a gun. "Hey Max, you saw that double-barreled death machine heading towards us, right?" Rex said. Maximus nodded and said, "Yeah, and we have to stop it." Rex looked at him like he was crazy and said, "You make it sound so easy." They managed to take care of the last two gunners and started moving towards the tank with no real plan in mind. That was when they saw it. There was something moving in from behind the tank and now quickly overtaking it. It wasn't a car or truck of any sort either. For one thing, it had only two wheels, and for another, it was running on horsepower literally. Maximus had never seen one before. The army had stopped using them long before he was even born, when cars got invented. But riding towards them was a chariot. The chariot itself was nothing compared to the 4 horses pulling them. They were huge, the size of their truck probably. Even Hephaestus could probably ride on one of those, and using these horses to pull the chariot made sense once they saw the man riding on it. He was big, well over 8 feet tall. And not just tall either, the guy was fat, morbidly obese even. He was so huge that Maximus could probably use his shadow as a shade during a sunny day. His armor seemed as ancient as the chariot, with a weird mix of metal, leather, and heavy clothing. He also had a bearskin tied around his neck like a scarf of some sort, with the bear's head resting on his shoulder. And his face matched that of the bear's a bit too. His entire face and head were covered in thick black hair that seemed to have never been cut in his life. It was also braided in odd places with what looked like tiny bone fragments. He also had the biggest battle axe Maximus had ever seen, strapped to his back. One clean sweep from that thing could make oak trees fall. The chariot rode faster now, gaining speed, but when it reached them it did not stop. Instead, it just rode past them towards the skirmish in which Achilles was in, and came to a halt. As the huge man stepped down from his chariot, the only thing Maximus could think was that the champion Diomedes sure did go to a lot of trouble to look the part of the barbarian king. The Soldiers of Ares, Chapter 35. Diomedes got off his chariot, and the fighting stopped for a minute. "What is this? The vermin is still alive." "As expected from you, woman," he said. His voice was loud and harsh like he was gargling rocks. "Champion, these fighters are not," Captain Sharp began to say, but Diomedes shouted, "Silence! I don't want your excuses. Now where is the inventor?" "Still on the move, sir," Captain Sharp said. The barbarian went to his chariot and pulled on a latch. The leashes tying the horses to the chariot fell to the ground. The horses were free now, and the first thing they did was move to the fallen soldiers and start feeding on them. It was disgusting to watch, and Maximus wasn't even sure if all of them were dead. "Sir, those are our men," Captain Sharp said in shock. But Diomedes turned to her. "If they have fallen so easily in battle, then it is an embarrassment to call them the men of the war god. They shall serve well as horse food, though." And he said this with a grin. Captain Sharp fell to her knees and whispered, "How could you?" But Diomedes turned to the 5 remaining soldiers still standing and said, "Finish off this scum, or I'll personally feed you to my horses while you are all alive." The soldiers didn't need to be told this twice. They went ahead to attack Achilles. Diomedes then went to his horses, whose mouths were wet with blood now. "You can feed later, my pretties," he said. "Now go and hunt the old inventor. You have his scent, so bring him back to me alive. But you can snack on anyone else you find." The horses neighed at this, and they started running again in the direction in which the truck went. The barbarian king then went ahead to sit on his chariot to watch his soldiers face off against Achilles. Maximus was watching all this from a distance, and he felt like someone had replaced his blood with lava. It was like he was holding back from exploding. He felt so disgusted by the champion that he felt physically revolted by the man. His blade had begun to glow red again, brighter this time than ever before. It was now a bloody crimson, a color which reflected his emotions quite well, and at that moment the only thing he wanted to do was to drive his crimson blade straight into the barbarian king's heart. But Maximus had been so distracted by this that he had failed to see that the tank had fired at him. He would have been dead if Rex hadn't tackled him out of the way. "Max, listen, I know how you feel, and I know Diomedes does not deserve to live, but we have to leave him for now and concentrate on the bloody tank," Rex said. Maximus didn't say anything, but he nodded in agreement. Then together they went to face the tank again. The tank had gotten much closer now, and it showed no signs of stopping. Rex began to start firing at the tank with everything he had, but sadly it didn't even leave a dent. Its armor was simply too good. "What do we do now? My shots aren't working. Do you think that sword of yours could cut through its metal?" Rex asked. Maximus didn't know. He had seen Achilles cut through metal before, but he was in a completely different league than him. But Maximus was so angry, and his blade felt so powerful now, he knew he had to at least try. "I'll see if I can slow it down," he said. Rex nodded and said, "Listen, try and keep it occupied for a while. I got something that just might work against that thing, all right? But I can only use it once, so I need a clear shot." Maximus agreed and began to charge towards the tank. The ram tank kept firing at Maximus, but without any sort of armor slowing him down, he managed to dodge all of its shots. Finally, he was close enough to the tank to use his blade. As an added advantage, he was too close to the tank now for it to point its barrels at him. Maximus went ahead and started slashing at the tank's armor. The tank was still moving, but it was at such a slow pace that he could easily keep up with it. The only problem was the armored hull was too strong for his blade to make a scratch on it. From afar, Rex was still firing at the tank, but now the tank was concentrating its fire on him. There was no way he could get a clear shot for whatever he was planning while under such heavy fire. Then an idea sparked in Max's head. It was true that his blade could not cut through the metal alloy armor hull of the tank. But there was still one part of the tank that was not covered by it, its tires. With all his might, Maximus took a huge slash at the tread tires of the RAM tank. The tires were pretty thick as well, and an ordinary sword would never be able to cut through it. But his was no ordinary sword. His overheated blade slashed straight through the tank's tires, finally bringing the metal behemoth to a stop. Maximus thought that was it, but his troubles did not end there. The hatch at the top of the tank's hull opened, and a soldier popped out of it with a gun pointed straight at Maximus. Bang! A shot was fired, but Maximus was still standing. This was because it was Rex who had taken the shot before the soldier could pull the trigger. The soldier lay dead on the ground now, but Rex didn't stop there. He began to run straight at the tank as if he was going to meet it with a headbutt. As he got closer, he shouted, "Max, run!" Maximus had no idea what he was planning, but he decided to take his friend's advice and bolted away from the tank. As he turned back to see what was going on, he saw that Rex was aiming his head at the mouth of one of the tank barrels. Then he saw that a small red light was blinking on his metal horn. When he got close enough, the horn ejected itself towards the tank. It traveled like a miniature rocket straight into its barrel, and Maximus heard beeping sounds coming from the inside now. After about 3 beeps, boom, a huge explosion occurred, and the tank was up in flames. The blast had blinded Maximus for a few seconds, but when he finally regained his sight, he saw that the entire tank was destroyed, and only its burning hull remained. It looked like Hephaestus had fitted Rex's horn with a mega bomb. Who knew? But Maximus had no time to celebrate as he saw Rex's body lying right next to the burning tank. It seemed he was too close to the tank and got caught in the explosion when it happened. Maximus ran to his friend, praying that he was still alive. He reached him and was relieved to see that he was still breathing. But he was still bleeding badly from a wound in his chest, and he needed some medical attention real soon. Maximus tore out a piece of his sleeve and used it to try and stop the bleeding. It had helped, but it was not enough. He dragged his friend's body away from the flaming wreckage, but he spent all his energy in doing so. He sat down next to Rex and did all that he could to try and cover up the bleeding wound. Behind all this, Diomedes was still sitting in his chariot. The tank explosion had distracted him for a few minutes, but he finally looked back at the fight with an annoyed expression on his face. Only the fight was over, and Achilles stood there with his bright blue blade surrounded by fallen soldiers of Ares. "Well, you really are something, aren't you?" Diomedes said. He still had no idea who Achilles was. His face was still not clearly visible in the darkness, and the only light now came from his blade. "Or maybe it's just that the ones chasing after you were utterly useless," he continued. He got off his chariot and walked up to Captain Sharp, who was still kneeling on the ground, clearly having lost her will to fight. "Bah, what use do I have with broken toys like you?" the barbarian said. He then drew his humongous battle axe and made a hack straight for the captain's neck. But the axe never made contact as it was swiftly blocked by a blue blade. As Achilles stood there defending Captain Sharp's life, he said, "Why don't you try that on someone who can fight back?" The blue glow from his blade was shining on his scar now, and the expression on his face was more dangerous than ever. It wasn't the unaffected, emotionless face he had before, or the expression of utter focus he had while fighting. What was seen on his face now was pure and unimaginable anger. The Soldiers of Ares. Chapter 36. This had got the barbarian's attention. "You would defend your enemy. Why, because she is a woman, or because she is unarmed?" he said as he held his battle axe up again. "Neither. I just couldn't wait another second to end you," Achilles said. And then it began. Diomedes took the first strike when he tried to bring his axe down on Achilles, but he was easily dodged. Soon the battle went into full swing. Diomedes was surprisingly fast for someone of his size, and his strikes were swift and accurate. But there was no way he could match Achilles in speed. He dodged everything that was thrown at him. He managed to land a few blows on the barbarian, but they were ineffective. No matter how hard the strike was, it just didn't go through his amalgam of metal and leather. Oh, you're starting to notice, aren't you? My armor is not just for show. It has been blessed with very powerful magic, and even if you get past that, my very skin is harder than stone. It will take a lot more than your blue glow stick to cut me, the giant barbarian said. At these words, Achilles pushed back and held his blade ready. It was already glowing blue, but then it let out a kind of pulse. The blade's glow turned more violent now, and the sword looked as though it was covered in blue flames. Then he took one swift slash aimed at his foe's large chest. The slash cut straight through the bearskin and the metal underneath it. His chest was visible now, and there was a cut on it. Achilles' blade was now stained with the barbarian king's blood. Diomedes staggered back, and he was shocked at the sight of his own blood. "Perhaps I should not take you so lightly," he said, gritting his teeth. He held his axe with both his arms, and it started to get bigger. The axe began to change its color as well. It did not glow, but the entire battle axe turned bright red, like it had just been soaked in blood. "Now tremble at the power of my blood-seeker, the axe that can cut through anything on earth," Diomedes shouted, and brought the axe down on his enemy. The very ground shook at the strike. The land beneath them cracked and fissures appeared. The entire battlefield was covered in dust, all by just one blow from the great axe. But when the dust began to clear, the barbarian king saw something that made him stop moving. The axe had not made contact with Achilles or even his blade. Instead, it had been blocked by a large circular shield, and the axe had no effect on it. The shield was black and made from the same metal as the stick's armor, and it was also highly decorated with the ancient symbol of the earth. And even the barbarian Diomedes knew what it was. "Perhaps your axe can cut anything on the earth, but cutting the earth itself is a different matter," Achilles said. Then, with a mighty thrust, he pushed away the axe. Diomedes was wide open now, and within a matter of seconds his entire body was covered in wounds and blood. Diomedes staggered and fell back onto the ground. Achilles stood above him with his shield, and his now blue and blood-red blade at the barbarian's neck. "No, it can't be, but that's the Terra shield, forged against Troy." "And you wear pitch-black armor," Diomedes said. "You can't be. You're supposed to be dead." Achilles did not bother to answer the fallen champion. He was about to deliver his final blow, but Diomedes was not done yet. He slammed the ground with his axe, and the ground below them crumbled. In the confusion, he ran back towards his chariot. Achilles had staggered a little, not enough to let the barbarian go. The barbarian king had decided that running for his life was the best option for now. But then, suddenly, they heard a rumble from behind, and Diomedes looked on in glee as his 4 man-eating horses came charging towards them. "Ha! It seems you missed your chance. My pets are coming to my rescue. It doesn't matter even if you are the great Achilles, they will still eat you alive," Diomedes said. "And nobody will save you now." Achilles couldn't help smiling at this. He turned to the barbarian and said, "Yes, it seems nobody will." Diomedes finally looked up to see what was really happening. His precious pets weren't running towards his rescue. They were running away from something that was chasing them from the sky. As they got closer, Diomedes saw that a very heavily armed helicopter was firing at his horses, and his pets were merely running to escape its bullets. The first rays of daylight came, and they could see a symbol painted on the side of the helicopter, an owl with an olive branch in its mouth, which was the symbol of Athena. Along with the helicopter was a man with mechanical bronze wings, also chasing the horses. He was shooting at them with the 2 machine guns he had in each arm. And bringing up the rear of this very weird sight was Mia and Hedger, driving along in their now 3-wheeled truck. Maximus was watching all this from a distance, and he wasn't sure if it was all real, or whether he had finally gone insane. He had helped Rex the best he could, and now he watched as the man-eating horses ran right past Achilles. Diomedes had managed to grab onto one of his horses, and he was now riding on it as far away from this place as possible. Seeing their champion run away, the remaining soldiers, including Captain Sharp, decided it was best to follow him. The surviving soldiers were able to fit inside a single jeep. Achilles started chasing after them in one of the jeeps they left behind, but he came to a stop when he saw the state Rex was in. As the helicopter came nearer, he also signaled for them to land. But it was the metal-winged man who landed first. "What are you doing? They're going to escape," he said. Achilles looked at Rex and said, "One of our comrades needs immediate medical attention, and his life is more important to me than gaining a few prisoners of war." The winged man just nodded to this. Maximus could not tell if he was angry about this because he wore a mask. The mask was strange, as it had no openings for the mouth or nose. It looked like a full bronze oval-shaped plate with 2 holes in it for the eyes alone. In fact, his entire body was covered in a bronze suit that matched his wings. His suit also had silver designs on it, and a silver owl symbol on his chest. He was clearly a member of Athena's army, but Maximus had never seen a soldier with wings before. The helicopter landed and the winged man said, "Don't worry, we have some medical supplies aboard the copter and we can get him to Athens fast enough." The blades of the helicopter finally stopped spinning and its large side doors opened. Out of that 4 heavily armed Athenian soldiers stepped out and stood in formation. Then the pilot stepped out of the cockpit and the other soldiers greeted him with a salute. He was wearing high-grade armor which was light blue and the edges were lined with silver. The markings on the armor were clearly Greek like that of Achilles. He was also wearing a dark blue cape with Athena's symbol on it. It was the kind that only very high-ranking officers in the army used. He did not have any weapons on him, but Maximus was sure he probably had them safely tucked away in summoning crystals. But he did hold an ancient Greek helmet in his hand, complete with a large blue plume on top that looked like it came from the same set as his armor. From his face, it looked like he was in his 40s, but it still maintained some striking good features. His hair was black, but with streaks of gray mixed in with it on the sides. He also had a neatly kept beard, which also carried strands of gray. He had brilliant gray eyes that went nicely with his hair, and they seemed to house a lot of wisdom. His armor was also decorated with various metals. He seemed to be the man in charge, but when he saw Achilles, he smiled and said, "Never fear with nobody here." Maximus was still kneeling next to Rex's unconscious body, and he only got up once the soldiers had taken Rex inside the helicopter to get him treated. Mia had managed to drive the truck back to them somehow, even with one of its tires completely shredded off. She and Hedger got out of the truck and helped Daedalus out as well. The winged man glided to them immediately and hugged Daedalus. "Father, you're alive," he said. It dawned on Maximus that Daedalus had a son and one with mechanical wings too. But of course, his father did not return the sentiments as he was still off in his own world. "Icarus, your father is still not well," Achilles said. "Ah, yes. Ajax told us about the predicament Dad had gotten himself into, but not to worry, we have the cure right here," Icarus said. He turned to the man in blue armor and said, "General, the antidote, please." The general searched his pockets and pulled out a small bottle with some green liquid inside. He handed it over to Icarus, who helped his father drink it. Nothing happened at first, but then a smile appeared on the old inventor's face and he said, "It's so good to see you as well, my son." Daedalus seemed to have finally made a full recovery. Maximus was happy to see the father and son reunited, but also a bit sad as this was something he could never have. Mia and Hedger came over and stood by his side now. "Quite a cool rescue, huh?" Hedger said, and Maximus was glad to see that his friends were all right. "How's Rex?" Mia asked. "Pretty bad," Maximus said, "but they're treating him inside now and he's the toughest bull I've ever met. I'm sure he'll make it." They nodded to this and Hedger asked, "Rex is beaten worse, so no worries. Any idea on what's going on, though?" Maximus shook his head and said, "Not sure, but that Acurus guy seems to be Daedalus's son. As for the guy in charge, I think his name is General Nobody." "What kind of name is Nobody?" Mia asked, confused. Achilles, who had overheard their conversation, turned to them. There was actually a small smile on the serious warrior's face. "Nobody is a nickname we have for this guy," he said. "You see, once when he was caught by a Cyclops tribe chief, he told him his name was Nobody. So when he escaped and started attacking the Cyclops, it started screaming that nobody was attacking him. The other Cyclops, thinking that then nothing was wrong, did not bother to enter their chief's cave. General Nobody came up to them now and said it was a silly move, but luckily Cyclops weren't known for their intellectual decision-making skills. And as for the name, Nobody, my friends still use it, just to annoy me." He then held out his hand for Maximus to shake and said, "Allow me to introduce myself. I am General Odysseus of the Athenian army." The Soldiers of Ares, Chapter 37. Odysseus was not a name you just never heard about. He was the man who ended the Trojan War. The entire Trojan horse was his idea. He was said to be one of the greatest strategic minds in the world and the current leader of Athena's army. The only thing that surpassed his skills as a warrior was his cunningness. Maximus had heard that though he did not visit the battlefield itself frequently, it was he who orchestrated all of Minerva's battle tactics. He was the brains behind the entire operation, and considering how well Athena's forces were keeping the much larger army of Ares at bay, Odysseus was doing his job pretty well. It took Maximus a few seconds to realize that he was staring with an open mouth at the general, and he quickly shook the hand offered to him after that. "I guess you all already have an idea on who Odysseus is. You should also know that he is another member of the Omega-7, Achilles said. Then he turned to Odysseus and said, "These are Maximus, Hedger, and Mia. The Minotaur inside is Rex." They have been a great help in reaching this far. Maximus was pretty sure Achilles could have made it even without their help, but he chose just to take the compliment. In that case, you are all welcome to join us in Athens, but you might not want to mention to anyone you are from Mars, Odysseus said. How did you know? Maximus asked. You still have your army dog tags. I saw one on your friend Rex as well. I would suggest you remove those before entering the city, Odysseus said. Maximus nodded and went ahead to do so. Daedalus walked up to them now and said, I see all of you have already gotten acquainted. You have already met my son Icarus, I suppose. Icarus nodded at them, but he didn't say anything. Maximus had a feeling he was not the very friendly type. One of the soldiers came out of the helicopter and said that Rex was stabilized, but that he still needed proper medical care as fast as he could. Not to worry, Odysseus said. My Phaeacian Pelican is one of the fastest copters in the world. It was a gift from the Phaeacian king to haste my return home from the Trojan War, and I have kept it up to date with the latest of Athenian technology. It will get us to Athens in under an hour. Maximus had to agree the helicopter was a real marvel to look at. It was 3 times the size of any ordinary helicopter, and it had a very futuristic design. The copter was gray and white, which kind of made it look like an angry storm cloud, and it had multiple guns and cannons on it. Its rotating blade was as long as the helicopter itself, and it had 2 smaller blades also. It also sprouted 2 wings that were short for the copter, but each one did hold 2 very large-looking missiles and a heavy machine gun at each end. It also had 4 very large jet exhausts in the back, so Maximus did not doubt what Odysseus said about its speed. The helicopter looked like it could take out multiple battalions without much trouble. They got onto the copter while one of the soldiers drove their truck into its cargo hold. The insides were pretty luxurious as well, and all of them could fit in easily. Once all of them, except Icarus, were inside, they took off, and the winged warrior followed them closely behind. Maximus went to sit next to Rex, who looked much better now. But he still hadn't regained his consciousness. They were flying through the air in no time, and Maximus had to admit, the Pelican was fast. Odysseus had let one of his soldiers drive so that he could join them in the back. They were all getting their wounds treated now. Maximus was the worst of the bunch, with multiple wounds and even a few broken ribs. Now that the fight was over and his adrenaline level had dropped back to normal, he could feel every bit of pain in his aching body. But he was no stranger to wounds or broken bones, and he knew he would be all right. Even Hedger and Mia had some minor bumps and bruises. It seemed driving away from a pack of man-eating horses had been pretty rough. The only person who didn't seem to have a scratch on him was Achilles. He had removed his armor once he boarded the helicopter, and the armor had protected him from everything. The armor of Styx, true to its legend, really was invulnerable. Only his bionic leg had sustained some damage, and Achilles was trying not to move it much. But he looked really tired, and he had chugged down 2 bottles of water when he first entered. So how did you find us anyway? Achilles asked. Odysseus chuckled and said, Don't think Ares is the only one who knows how to track someone. I had called up Ajax once I got back from the battlefront yesterday. He informed me that you had already left, but he did tell me the route you would be taking. And once I heard that an entire building had blown up in that route, I just put 2 and 2 together to figure out that you were involved. You always were a magnet for trouble. Achilles nodded to this, and Odysseus turned to the rest of them. So you lot are from Mars, huh? Can't say I'm friends with a lot of people from there for obvious reasons, he said with a smile. Actually, Mia here is not. But I think you are quite familiar with her home as well, Achilles said. Maximus did not understand what he was talking about, and judging by the expression on Odysseus, neither did he. Maximus realized that Mia hadn't uttered a single word since she met Odysseus, but she seemed to know what Achilles was talking about. She pulled up her sleeve again to reveal her mark of the candle with the burning sea and showed it to Odysseus. The smile vanished from his face immediately. It was replaced by an expression of pure shock and regret. Oh, my poor child, he said. How did you escape? I managed to sneak aboard one of the ships that brought in people. I hid in their cargo hold till I reached the mainland, she said in a low voice. There was sadness in Odysseus's eyes now. We haven't had a refugee from there in quite the while now, and I hoped that the place had finally met its end somehow. The fact that it still survives is a matter of great personal shame to me. Maximus could feel the regret in his voice now. It took a few seconds, but Odysseus regained his composure and said, Mia, I promise you that I will personally help you in any way I can. Please rest for now. He did not seem to be in a mood to talk anymore, and he excused himself to check something in the cockpit. Maximus opened his mouth to ask something, but Achilles gave him a stern look that said, Let it go. Mia got up and went to the corner as well, and she made sure to avoid eye contact with anyone. Maximus tried to get some sleep after that, but the throbbing pain from his broken rib kept waking him up. He looked around to see what everyone was up to. Hedger had hung himself upside down with his tail on a hook, which was meant for parachutes, and gone off to sleep again, and Rex was still out cold. As for Mia, she was still in a corner not talking to anyone. Achilles had begun meditating. He used to do this sometimes while training him, and Maximus knew he hated to be disturbed while doing this. But opposite to him, Daedalus was looking out the window with a sad expression on his face, which Maximus found weird, since he expected him to be real happy, returning home with his mind back in control. He asked the old inventor what was wrong. Max, it's nothing important. I just wish my son would ride with us inside." Maximus looked outside to see that Daedalus was looking at Icarus flying right beside them. "Why doesn't he?" Maximus asked. Daedalus looked at him sadly and said, "Well, Max, my son does not enjoy the company of people. Not anymore, anyway." Maximus had felt that Icarus was not very friendly, but he thought it was just towards them. But the way Daedalus put it, there was something else going on. "What happened?" he asked. Daedalus looked outside at his son and said, "He wasn't always like this. He was a happy boy while growing up. When he was around 20, Emperor Zeus had called me to Olympus. He was so impressed with my work that he offered me immortality. I requested of him to do the same for my son as well, since I did not want to live forever alone, and the emperor agreed. As years passed, he grew adamant about joining the army. As his father, I did not want a warrior's life for him, but it was his choice, and since that was what he wanted, I did not stand in his way. To help him, I built him those wings, and it gave him a great advantage in his fights. But armed with those wings, he grew arrogant in his skills. He thought he was good enough to take anyone on. Then one day he was flying over the sun god Apollo's territory. Apollo was not happy about this, and he ordered him to leave his airspace or to face his wrath. But instead of flying away, Icarus accepted the sun god's challenge. This was the worst mistake he had ever done. The sun god thrashed him in battle, and in his final attack burned his skin and melted his wings. Icarus fell to the ground and was barely alive when he was returned to Athens. I managed to keep him alive and even mend his wings, but no matter what I tried, his burns would not heal. Now that suit is the only thing that keeps my son safe from excruciating pain." Maximus listened to the whole story and had no idea what to say. Finally he muttered, "I'm sorry." Well, so am I for giving him those wings in the first place," Daedalus said with a sad smile. "But I just wish he would forgive himself. He was never the same after that. He grew detached from his old life, even from me." Daedalus then continued to stare outside the window. Maximus wished that he hadn't asked what was bothering him. The story had left him feeling like he had eaten some rotten eggs. Maximus also decided to just stare out the window and watch the clouds pass, trying his best to forget about Icarus. A few minutes passed, and that's when Maximus saw something appear on the horizon. He turned to Daedalus and asked, "Is that?" Daedalus was smiling now. "Beautiful, isn't she? You might want to show your friends as well. They wouldn't want to miss this," he said, and Maximus went to do just that. First he woke up Hedger from his nap. "What?" Hedger asked. "Are we under attack again?" "No, but you might want to look out the window," he said. He then went ahead to Mia and said, "Hey Mia," but she cut him off. "Look, Max, I'm really not in the mood to," she began to say. But she stopped in mid-sentence since she too had just seen what was outside. "Wow," she said, as she went ahead to stare out the window. Because appearing on the horizon was the most amazing city they had ever seen. It was huge, bigger than Thrace or Vulcan's city, and the buildings were tall. A few of them would have easily crossed 50 floors. They were made entirely of metal and glass, both of which reflected the sunlight falling on them, which made the entire city shine. The structures weren't just giant rectangles either. There were constructions of every shape imaginable. One of the towers grew slimmer and slimmer as it went up until the last floor could only hold a single room. Another one was lean all the way to the end, and on top of that was a huge oval. It looked like a blimp was balancing on a pole. There were others too of different shapes and sizes, like a dome with a large telescope coming out of it, and a curvy one that looked like an open book. Almost all of these had obscene amounts of glass and silver on them. The buildings did not have smoking chimneys like in Vulcan, but a lot had multiple antennas and other weird mechanical devices. It also had a very long highway system that ran through the entire city like a giant snake. A few of these roads were so raised and curvy that they looked like they belonged on a roller coaster. The city itself was on a raised platform, and it was surrounded by a sea of green grass as far as the eye could see. And it was surrounded by a perfectly circular wall. The wall itself was not very tall, but it was emitting an enormous energy barrier that covered the entire city like a huge dome. Maximus realized that this was Aegis, but he hadn't expected it to be so big. Aegis was clear enough to see through it, but it had a bluish tinge that made its boundaries easily distinguishable. It made it look like the entire city was encased in one huge snow globe, and surrounded by the green grass and with a clear sky in the background. It looked like a beautifully painted picture. Everyone was staring at the city now. Even Achilles had stopped his meditation to take a peek at this work of art. Odysseus came back from the cockpit again. His smile reappeared on his face as he said, "Well, folks, I present to you Athens." The Soldiers of Ares. Epilogue. The doors to Ares' throne room were closed shut, and there were only two people inside it now, the war god Ares himself and the messenger god Hermes. Ares was in a very foul mood right now. He had just heard the news that even his champion had failed to capture Daedalus, and that the old inventor was back in Athens now under the watchful eyes of Athena. Needless to say, he had had better days. He took his anger out on anything he could find. His entire throne room was a mess as broken furniture and twisted weapons littered the floor. There were also the bodies of two of his guards, who had just been unlucky enough to be there when Hermes brought the news. Ares went ahead to throw a decorative shield at the wall, cracking it. "Now whatever did those poor shields do to you?" Hermes asked. Ares turned to him with all his rage and said, "How can you be still making jokes at a time like this? Even my champion has been defeated. We failed our mission." Hermes put his index finger up and began to shake it. No, my dear war god. "Let's make one thing clear. You failed your mission, not me," Hermes said. "My mission was to locate the inventor and provide sufficient intel on his rescuers, both of which I did perfectly. Recapturing Daedalus was your department. So in short, it was you who failed." Ares looked angry enough to break the messenger god's neck at these words, but he restrained himself and said, "And I'm sure you put it exactly like that to our boss." Hermes didn't respond to this in words. He merely gave a mischievous grin. Ares decided to take a break from his wrecking spree and went ahead to sit on his throne. "So you're sure it was him who rescued Daedalus," he said. "When has my information ever been wrong?" Hermes said, "Besides, your barbarian champion confirmed it himself." Ares brought his arm down on his throne with great force. The metal armrest broke off. "So then Achilles is still alive. He was a pain in the neck during the Trojan War, too. I was so glad when I heard that he was killed at the end of the war, but just my luck to have the greatest swordsman in the world return from the dead against me." "Now don't go throwing around that title to just anyone, Ares," a new voice said. The two gods looked to see a man leaning in the corner, covered by the curtain's shadow. The man slowly came out. "Last time I checked, I was a pretty good swordsman myself," he said, putting his hand around the hilt of his sheathed sword. "Well, look who it is," Hermes said. Both the gods recognized the man now. "How the heck did you get in here?" Ares asked. "Oh, please, Ares, I have got into much harder places than this temple of ego you built," the man said. "So the real question is, what am I doing here?" Hermes gave a small chuckle and said, "It seems our benefactor has given your job to a more capable hand, Ares. I always liked you, Hermes. And you're right. I just got called in to clean up this little mess," the man said. Ares' face was almost as red as his armor with rage. "Then what are you waiting around for?" the war god said, gritting his teeth. "Patience is a virtue, Ares, and I don't plan to jump in and do something stupid like you did. Anyway, I'll be staying here in the meantime and I'll help myself to your supplies," the man said and walked away to the door. He stepped outside saying, "I've already checked myself into one of your deluxe suites," and with that he left. Once the man was well out of earshot, Ares said, "The boss must really want Daedalus back if he brought him out of retirement." Hermes nodded to this and said, "You got that right. When all is said and done, he knows how to get the job done." "He's not that great," Ares grumbled. But Hermes just smirked at him and said, "Try telling that to every quest, monster and warrior that he has faced and defeated. Even the most powerful Gorgon in history, Medusa herself, fell to his blade. The man is a true living legend. They call him Perseus, the original hero." The Soldiers of Ares. End of Book 1. Links to the books in the bio. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this chapter, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. See you in the next chapter.